بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So today is lesson number 57 in our series on the book Taqreeb Tadmuriyyah, and also this is lesson number 22 in the section on Al-Qadr and Al-Shara', the divine decree and the divine legislation. So just to recap, in the previous lesson we started looking at what is the essence of the religion from a practical point of view. So in light of the previous discussion about Al-Qadr, what is Al-Qadr, our belief in Al-Qadr. Al-Qadr is that Allah is the creator of all things, and He created all things through ways and means, causes and effects. He has prior knowledge of all of that, and that has been written down in the book. And whatever comes to be, it comes to be by way of Allah's will, His irada, His wish, His irada, and His creative power, His khalq, His creative power. Nothing is outside of that. And everything which occurs is by the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at the same time, there is the sharia, the legislation of Allah, in which Allah commands and prohibits, and there is no clash or contradiction between the two. And so the lesson that we had in the previous lesson, it kind of highlights in a practical way, what does this mean? What does this mean practically for a believer, for a Muslim, to implement or to act upon this reality to do with the Sharia and the reality to do with Al-Qadr? Right? What does it mean? And this was summarized in a very simple statement by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, or in what Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah summarizes with a simple sentence, which is Al-Mu'min ma'murun bi fi'l al-ma'mur wa tark al-mahdhur wa as-sabr ala al-maqdur. Right? So this statement that we started with in the previous lesson, it simply says that the believer is commanded, is ordered to do what has been commanded, to keep away from what has been prohibited, and to have patience upon whatever has been decreed. In this sentence, if you think about it, is a combination between Ash-Shara', the legislation, and Al-Qadr. Right? So Ash-Shara', the legislation of Allah, we are commanded to do what has been ordered and keep away from that which has been prohibited. Fi'lul ma'mur wa tark al-mahdhur. And then we are also at the same time ordered was-sabr ala al-maqdur, to have patience upon whatever is decreed. So this is how practically we act upon the principle of the Sharia and the principle of Al-Qadr. And so in the previous lesson, so we discussed this statement, which brings these things together. And then Shaykh al-Islam said that basically for each of these two, Ash-Shara' wal-Qadr, there are two principles that we abide by in relation to these two things, both before and after. So basically, he said that as it relates to the Sharia, so when we embark upon the Sharia, when we embark upon acting upon the Sharia, there is a before and an after. So the before is that we strive in terms of seeking knowledge and we make ijtihad, and we acquire knowledge of the religion, and we act upon the religion. So we make ijtihad in ilm and amal. In ilm and amal. Right? So this is before we do the action. So for example, a person, he learns about purification, he learns about prayer, he knows the rulings, and then he strives in that, or it could be hajj, or it could be whatever it might be. So he strives in ilm and amal, and then he acts upon what has been ordered. Now, once that has taken place, there is an after, which is that you make istighfar, right? That you seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because there is shortcoming in your worship, and also because it's not possible for a servant to be grateful to Allah for all of His favors and bounties. And so no matter what ibadah that we do, worship that we do, even if we bring all of the obligations, that still would not make up for the bounties and the favors that Allah has showered us with. And so therefore it is a necessity that we follow all of worship and ibadah with istighfar, which is seeking forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for shortcomings and the likes. And this is the way of the prophets and messengers. It's the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so this is how we behave in relation to the shara', to the legislation, right? Then on the other side is al-qadar, and there's a before and an after in relation to al-qadar. So in relation to al-qadar, we take the ways and the means, we make tawakkul upon Allah, we seek aid from Allah, we seek refuge in Allah from the evils that are to occur, right? So all of this is before the maqdur, before the thing that actually happens, right? So for example, let's say for example that you make dua to Allah to protect you from poverty and debt and the likes, and so you make dua to Allah, you make isti'adha to Allah, you seek refuge in Allah, and then you take the ways and means, you make tawakkul upon Allah. But qadar Allah, the thing which is maqdur, it takes place. Okay, so now this is after the fact, after the event, after the decree, right? So here, this is now to be faced with patience, with sabr, with resilience, with firm determination, and knowing full well that whatever happened was never going to pass you by. It was never going to pass you by, and whatever Allah did not decree was never going to come to you, right? So with this firm belief in al-qadar, you are able to face all hardships, calamities, after they occur. So there is a before and an after, right? So there's a before and an after for the command and the prohibition, which is the sharia, right? You strive in knowledge and action, and then after that has taken place, meaning after you do the obligated or the commanded, and you keep away from the prohibited, then you make istighfar because there is still shortcoming, right? So this is the two principles in relation to the shara', to the legislation. And to al-qadar, there's a before and an after. The before, as we said, is to take the ways and means to seek, to make isti'ana, seek aid from Allah, seek refuge in Allah, make tawakkul upon Allah, do everything you can to avoid hardship, difficulty, calamity, whatever might come from the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, after the maqdur, the thing has occurred, then that's to be faced, with patience, as we said, patience and firmness. And that can only happen with a firm belief in al-qadar. A firm belief in al-qadar, which is to acknowledge the things which have come in various ahadith or in the Quran, for example, that no calamity befalls except that it is in a book before we bring it out, and the fact that if the whole of mankind were to gather together in order to harm you with something, they would not be able to harm you unless Allah had written it. And if they gathered together to benefit you with something, they would not be able to benefit you unless Allah had written it. Right? So to believe in and to acknowledge these things, so that when something happens that that is painful, that is harmful, that gives you grief, anxiety, then you are able to face it with patience. Right? So this is what we established in the previous lesson. It's a very simple formula in relation to how we go about worshipping Allah and dealing with the worldly affairs. How do we behave with the legislation? How do we behave with the decree? Right? It's summarized in one simple sentence: فعل المأمور وترك المحظور والصبر على المقدور. And what does that mean? The first half is the legislation, the second half is sabr, is the qadar. And each of these two themselves have two principles, a before and an after, right? So it's a very simple formula, and it explains the reality of our religion. This is the lub, or the essence, the essence of our religion. And if we were to ask the question, okay, let's take a look at, what's the essence of the religion of the Yahud or the Nasara? What makes up the essence of their religion? Now, if we took a look at the Christians, for example, it's to simply hold the belief, to have an acknowledgement, a mental acknowledgement that, Jesus died, for your sins. And once you make that one-time mental acknowledgement, you are now saved. And this, to act by the law, to abide by the law, by the command and the prohibition, is not really necessary. It's not part of salvation, right? It's only that belief, that mental acknowledgement, and it's like love, just absolute love, and that's all that's required, and that's the essence of their religion, right? And so obviously this is not the way of Isa alayhi salam, and this is an altered religion, and so that's the essence of that. And then you have the Yahud, and they basically claim that they have somehow been given special DNA and special genes, and they have a special purpose, which is only for them, and paradise is only for them, and everybody is there to serve them, and other types of supremacist, racist ideas, which emanate from the Talmud, and this has got nothing to do with what Musa alayhi salam, what he brought and what he taught. Musa alayhi salam, he brought and taught Tawheed and the Torah, the original, the law, right? And as for those who came after him, then they altered and changed and fabricated, concealed, twisted, distorted, brought new ideas, introduced a type of nationalism, ethno-supremacism, and so they became the chosen people, and for whom the Messiah is going to come and conquer all nations and subdue all nations. This, and you can, even amongst them, you can be like an atheist, you can be whatever, but it's the genes that count, right? So you never stop being a Yahudi, right? So you can, as we said, you can become an atheist, you can become a devil worshipper, you can do whatever you want, but as long as you have those special holy genes, then you remain a Yahudi, right? And you are special just by way of that special DNA or those genes. This notion or this idea that is found amongst many of the Yahud, and it's it derives from some of their like the Talmud and whatever. This has got nothing to do with the religion of Musa alayhi salam. Musa alayhi salam came with Islam, came with Tawheed, came with the truth. So the point being that this essence of the religion, essence of Islam, we see it very, very clearly explained and outlined, and this is the nature of, this is true religion, right? It is to worship Allah with obedience through the command and the prohibition, and it is to be patient over the decrees. So to believe in the legislation and to believe in al-qadar. So anyhow, this now brings us to today's chapter, today's section. And today's section in this brief section, so inshallah be a short lesson, hopefully, what Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah does is to divide people in terms of where they stand in relation to implementing these principles, in relation to the Sharia and in relation to Al-Qadr, right? So what did we establish? We established 4 principles in total, right? So there is the legislation, which is command and prohibition, and there is Al-Qadr, right? Which is the worldly things that take place. And in relation to each of these two, there are 2 principles each, as we already mentioned. So we have to implement all 4 of these principles to be good, strong believers. What does this mean? It means that you strive with all of your effort, you make ijtihad in seeking ilm, seeking knowledge, seeking understanding of the religion and of its rulings, and then you act upon that, firstly, and then thereafter you are humble and you make istighfar, you seek forgiveness from Allah because there is a shortcoming, and this is how you deal in terms of the Sharia. And in terms of Al-Qadr, you have tawakkul upon Allah, you seek aid from Him, you seek refuge in Him, and you seek all things through which you ward off harms and evils, and in which you secure your beneficial interests, like in terms of the world, worldly wise, right? Which means livelihood, which means safety, which means security, which means all these things. And so you strive in that, and you obviously, before the thing, you are making tawakkul, you take all the ways and means. And then after that, it is to be patient, to be firm, to be resilient, to have yaqeen, to have certainty in the hereafter, and in the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, when it comes to people, and obviously Shaykh al-Islam Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he wrote what he wrote, and he explained the different categories of people in terms of actual interaction with people. So when you interact with people, you will see that you can divide the believers, the Muslims, the believers, into different categories in terms of how they abide by these things, right? So there are 4 categories. So today's lesson is going to be looking at each of these 4 categories. And so we begin today's lesson from this point. The Shaykh says after the chapter, وَالنَّاسِ في هذا المقام مقام الشرع في هذا المقام مقام الشرع والقدر أربعة أقسام. People in relation to this situation, the situation regarding the legislation and the divine decree, they fall into 4 categories. الأولى, the first, من حققوا هذه الأصول الأربعة أصلي الشرع وأصلي القدر، وهم المؤمنون المتقون الذي كان عندهم من عبادة الله تعالى والاستعانة به ما تصلح به أحوالهم فكانوا لله وبالله وفي الله. So he says the first group are those who enact and actualize these 4 principles. The 2 principles related to the legislation and the 2 principles related to Al-Qadr. So they are the believers, the pious righteous ones, who have with them worship of Allah. So they worship Allah, they are given to worship of Allah, and they also seek aid in Allah for what will improve their state and their condition. Right? So they worship Allah in terms of religion and worship, and then they seek aid from Allah in the worldly affairs, in the affairs that are going to rectify their situation. Right? So they combine between both things. The hereafter, worshipping Allah, which is for the hereafter, and seeking aid from Allah in the benefit of the world. So they combine between both things. So these فَكَانُوا لِلَّهِ وَبِاللَّهِ وَفِي. What this means is وَكَانُوا لِلَّهِ means that they are acting sincerely for the sake of Allah. فَكَانُوا لِلَّهِ. This means فَكَانُوا لِلَّهِ. They are acting sincerely for the sake of Allah. وَبِاللَّهِ, and they are acting by Allah, means that they are seeking aid from Allah. وَبِاللَّهِ, seeking aid from Allah. And وَفِلَّهِ means that they are, meaning for Allah. This means that they are engaged in worship. They are worshipping Allah. That's all that means. Meaning in terms of his sharia, following his sharia. So then he says, وَهَؤُلَاءِ أَهْلُ الْقِسْطِ وَالْعَدَلِ الَّذِينَ شَهِدُوا مَقَامَ الرُّبُوبِيَّةِ وَالْأُلُوهِيَّةِ وَهُمْ أَعْلَى الْأَقْسَامِ فإن هذا مقام الذين أنعم الله عليهم من النبيين والصديقين والشهداء والصالحين. He says, and these people, so these believers, they are the people of al-qist wal-adal, meaning those who are upon justice. They give everything its due right. So they are people of adal, people of justice, people of qist. And they have observed and witnessed the station of rububiyyah. The station of rububiyyah is Allah being the Lord. Allah is the Lord, and they witness Allah is the Lord. And the station of uluhiyyah. Uluhiyyah, meaning Allah is the deity, the one worshipped. And so these people are the highest of the levels, of the 4 levels. So this level is the level of those whom Allah has put His favor upon, like the prophets, the righteous, the truthful, the martyrs. Right? These are the categories of people in the Quran that Allah has bestowed His favor upon them. Now, if you pay attention to what the Shaykh said here, الَّذِينَ شَهِدُوا مَقَامَ الرُّبُوبِيَّةِ وَالْأُلُوهِيَّةِ, we can tie al-shar' wal-qadar, the legislation, and al-qadar to Allah's uluhiyyah and rububiyyah. Right? So when we say Allah is the Rabb, Allah is the Lord, Allah is the Rabb, we can tie to that al-qadar. Al-qadar. Because Allah is the Lord, Allah is the Creator, He is the Rabb, He is the Malik, He is the Mudabbir. And so al-qadar is tied to rububiyyah, right? So when we believe in al-qadar and we seek aid from Allah, we make tawakkul, we take the ways and the means, and then we have sabr upon hardships and things like that, what are we doing? We are witnessing, we are observing the fact that Allah is the Lord, Allah is the Rabb. And we are kind of, enacting, or we are actualizing our belief in His rububiyyah. And when we act upon the sharia, the legislation, which is the command and the prohibition, and we are obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we are worshipping Him, then what are we doing? We are observing, we are witnessing, we are enacting, we are actualizing the belief in Allah as the ilah, right? As the one worshipped, who has the right to be worshipped. So this is our enactment of uluhiyyah. So in other words, when we combine all of these things together, the 2 principles of the legislation, the 2 principles of al-qadar, we are witnessing and we are implementing and enacting our belief, practically speaking, in Allah being the Rabb and in Allah being the Ilah. This is Tawheed al-Rububiyyah and Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah. So anyhow, this is the first group, right? So these are the people who are blessed and favored, and they are of the highest station. Now the second group, the Shaykh says, al-qism al-thani man فاتهم التحقيق في أصلي القدر فكان عندهم من عبادة الله تعالى والاستقامة في شرعه ما عندهم لكن ليس عندهم قوة في الاستعانة بالله والصبر على أحكامه الكونية والشرعية. Now the second group, he says, are those who they lose, or they avoid, or they don't have the actualization of the two principles of al-qadr. Right? So as it relates to al-qadr, which means to rely upon Allah and seek His aid and seek His assistance and seek refuge in Allah, right, prior to the maqdur, and likewise after, to have sabr and so on and so forth, they do not have this. Right? But they do have worship. They have worship for Allah. They have uprightness in terms of following His legislation, but they do not have any strength in seeking aid from Allah, having patience upon His, rulings, whether they are rulings to do with the creation or rulings to do with the Sharia. They're not able to have sabr over that. And so as a result of that, فَيُصِيبُهُمْ عِنْدَ الْعَمَلِ مِنَ الْعَجَزِ وَالْكَسَلِ مَا يَمْنَعُهُمْ مِنَ الْعَمَلِ أَوْ إِكْمَالِهِ وَيَلْحَقُهُمْ بَعْدَ الْأَمَلِ مِنَ الْعُجْبِ وَالْفَخْرِ ما قد يكون سببا لحبوط عملهم وخذلانهم. So then he says, so basically these people, they are, when they engage in their affairs, they might be afflicted with something of like laziness and incapacity, and which would prevent them from acting or completing their action. And likewise, they may also be afflicted with something of like amazement and boasting about their actions, meaning of their worship and ibadah and so on and so forth. So these people are weaker than those in the first group. Right? Those in the first group are stronger. These people are weaker. And why is this? Because they are only witnessing the station of uluhiyyah over the station of rububiyyah. Right? Now, this won't really make sense until we start giving some examples. So let's give some examples. There are some people amongst mankind, amongst the people of Iman, and you see that they will be, in terms of worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will be very strong in His worship. They will fulfill their obligations. They will have a certain level of firmness, and they will be pious, they will be righteous, they will be devoted to their worship and everything. But when it comes to something from al-qadr, and a calamity occurs, a hardship occurs, right, you will find them that they are not able to have much patience over these things, right? And they will not be able to have patience. They will be weak. They will have despair. So here, this is a weakness in the arena of belief in al-qadr, having patience, strong belief in the rububiyyah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so in these kind of situations, when it comes to like worldly affairs, worldly calamities and things like that, they're not able to have patience. They're not able to, as the Shaykh said, they become incapacitated, they become weak, they become lazy, they become, so you despair, you become despondent, you become, all these things start happening. And this is because this person hasn't really combined between the principle of the legislation with the principle of al-qadr, right? So he's, embarked upon one and strong in one, but, weak in the other, weak on the other side. And so this person clearly is in a weaker position than the first level. The first level, they combine between the Sharia and al-qadr, they combine between rububiyyah and uluhiyyah, and they put all of that together and say that so they are the strongest and the happiest of people. So as we said, this refers to a category of people. You will see many people like this, given to devotion, given to worship, very firm and strict in their obligations, and doing everything from the adhkar and so on and so forth. Yet when it comes to a calamity or a hardship in the world, then they do not have the strength and the resilience and the firmness, and they they behave in ways which are not praiseworthy, because they don't have the sabr. So the Shaykh in fact says, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen in his commentary says, وَهَذَا عَلَيْهِ أَكْثَرُ النَّاسِ. Most people you will find are like this. Most people are like this. تجده في العبادة مجتهدا حريصا لكن في القدر تجده ضعيفا. You see this person very strong in worship, striving, eager, but when it comes to the affair of al-qadr, you see he's weak, and his isti'ana, seeking aid with Allah, from Allah, by his, is very weak, and you'll find him like depending upon himself. So he basically thinks that his worship is for Allah, and then whatever he does in the dunya, that he doesn't need to depend upon Allah, he doesn't need to rely upon Allah. Whatever he does, he's able to achieve it, and there's no connection between the ibadah, the sharia, and al-qadr. Right? So the devotion is in the masjid, and the righteousness, you do it, whatever. When it comes to the world, it's it's just whatever you do. And so these people, they're either led to either despair and weakness and not able to have patience, or if they achieve what they achieve, they are led to boasting and pride and things like that, because they believe it is by way of their own deeds. And really the qadr and belief in al-qadr isn't really playing a role here. So this will lead them to one of two affairs. Either it's weakness and lack of patience and despair, or it's the other side. If qadr is in their favor, it's pride and arrogance and boasting and whatever. So that's now like a weakness in that area. The third category now the Shaykh goes on to mention, and the third category are those, the Shaykh says, من فاتهم التحقيق في أصل الشرع فكانوا ضعفاء في الاستقامة على أمر الله تعالى ومتابعة شرعه، لكن عندهم قوة في الاستعانة بالله والتوكل عليه، ولكن قد يكون ذلك في أمور لا يحبها الله تعالى ولا يرضاها، فيعان ويمكن له بقدر حاله. This group now are the ones who are the other way around. So this group are the ones who do not establish the two principles of ash-shara', the legislation. So meaning that these are not given to worship, they're not given to obedience. They are weak in that respect. They are weak in worship, in their worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in having istiqamah, uprightness upon the command of Allah and following His Sharia. However, they do have strength in seeking aid from Allah and relying upon Allah, and even to the extent that this could be in things that Allah is not pleased with, things that Allah is not pleased with, is not happy with. And what happens is, purely because of their determination and their patience in pursuing these things, then they may be aided and may be given these things, right? And as a result, they might acquire types of knowledge and effects and influences that the group before them might not be given, right? So the group before, what is this group? People who are just given to worship, given to ibadah, dedicated to Allah's remembrance, and they are not really, when it comes to worldly affairs and having sabr and pursuing the worldly interests, they generally would not really be well informed, and they don't know how to handle the world, how to handle the dunya, how to handle calamities, how to handle hardships, and so they are weak in that respect. Here it's the other way around, right? These people are not given to much worship, but when it comes to the worldly affairs, the affairs of safety, security, livelihood, and whatever things they might seek, in the worldly affairs, because they have ijtihad, they have striving, and they apply what a person would apply in terms of al-qadr, meaning taking the ways and means, relying upon Allah, seeking aid from Allah, and having patience, resilience, and just keep going and going, whatever. Through that experience, they acquire a type of knowledge and understanding that the worshippers are not going to have, right? And even it could be in affairs that Allah is not pleased with and not happy with. And that's why you see amongst the Muslims, many Muslims who are sinful, they don't fulfill the obligations, maybe they don't pray, they don't fast, they don't whatever, But when it comes to the pursuits in the worldly affairs, it could be trade, could be business, it could be just handling life in general, right? They believe in Allah, they have tawakkul upon Allah, they have these things, but they don't obviously worship Allah, right? They don't fulfill the obligations to Allah, but they do have, you know, in times or in various states and conditions, they do have this isti'ana and so on and so forth. So because of that, Allah gives them and aids them in some of those affairs, even though they might not be, and this is from His wisdom and decree, even though He is not pleased with that. Right? Now, so here there's a thing that we need to understand, which is that sometimes Allah, so for example, the second group, the worshippers, they are in a better condition in the hereafter, right? They're in a better condition in the hereafter. This third group we are speaking of, they are in a better condition in the world, right? In terms of the world, even though in the hereafter they will lose and be ruined, right? So the fact that Allah aids certain people in this way, even though they are not righteous, they are not worshippers, then that's because of a wisdom, right? So an example the Shaykh gives from the Quran to illustrate this point is the situation of the polytheists, the mushrikeen. Allah says, فَإِذَا رَكِبُوا فِي الْفُلْكِ دَعَوُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ فَلَمَّا نَجَّاهُمْ إِلَى الْبَرِّ إِذَا هُمْ يُشْرِكُونَ لِيَكْفُرُوا بِمَا آتَيْنَاهُمْ وَلِيَتَمَتَّعُوا فَسَوْفَ يَعْلَمُونَ. Allah says, when they embark upon a ship, on the ocean, on the sea, they invoke Allah, making their religion purely and sincerely for Him. Meaning that when the ocean becomes rough and the waves toss them and turn them, and they fear that they are going to be overturned and drowned in the ocean, these polytheists, in that moment, they abandon all of their gods that they worship on the land, or even in the sea. When they take the idols, they throw the idols over the ship and into the ocean. They abandon everything, and then they invoke only Allah alone, right? So here this is their reliance, tawakkul, isti'ana, calling upon Allah, doing all these things in a worldly affair. And so then what happens? فَلَمَّا نَجَّاهُمْ إِلَى الْبَرِّ إِذَا هُمْ يُشْرِكُونَ. So then when Allah saves them, so Allah responds to them. Allah actually responds to these people. Why? Because in this situation, they singled out Allah in dua, in isti'ana, in worship. They emptied their hearts of everything except for Allah, and Allah responded to them. Allah gave them what they wanted. So He saved them, delivered them to the land, and then when they come to the land again, then they forget all these things and they start committing their shirk again. And then Allah says, so this is their disbelief, so that they become disbelievers again in that which we have given them, and so that we give them a small enjoyment, but soon shall they know. Right? So what's the wisdom here? That this is just to establish the hujjah against them, that Allah saved you, bestowed you favors, and He returned you to the land, and then you return back to your disbelief. So enjoy for a short while, soon shall you know, right? So here, meaning that this category of people, this group and this category of people, as the Shaykh says, that Allah the Exalted, He knows that these mushrikun, He already knows that when He saves them, that they are going to return back to what they are going to do, right? He knows that, and they know that they submitted the affair to Allah, and but he knows that they are not going to return to istiqamah, and this is because in the hereafter they will lose, even if in the world they've attained some type of benefit, right? So this is the third type, or the third category of person, which is the one who in the worldly affairs, when it comes to issues of safety and security and livelihood and things like that, then they will rely upon Allah, they will invoke Allah, even though they are weak and neglectful in the affairs of worship. And this is this is really a test and a trial for these people, as we see with the mushrikeen. Allah gives them what they want, Allah gives them what they ask for, and also because it's also a rule in Allah's creation. In Allah's creation, it's a rule that the one who is puts in the effort, the one who strives, the one who uses the capacities Allah has given him of intelligence and ability and so on and so forth, that Allah, it's a rule that whoever puts in the effort and makes, if he believes in Allah and relies upon Allah, Allah will give him what he wants, right? Because by effort, by work, by striving, these are from the ways and means, and the ways and means, these are rules in Allah's creation. This is why we see amongst the people of disbelief, amongst the mushrikeen, amongst the Yahud, amongst the Nasara, people who are enterprising, they are industrious, they are hardworking, they put in the effort, they put in the time, they use their intelligence, and they make tremendous achievements in the worldly affairs, whether that is in trade, whether that is business, whether that's in industry, whether that's in technology, whether that's in whatever. Right? So this is going to happen because this is just simply from the rules in creation. You put in the effort for provision, and you then inshallah it will come to you. So this happens. And so with this category of people, even Muslims who are neglectful and sinful, then Allah will give them what they seek and pursue, and so their situation will be better in the life of the world, right? Whereas category number 2, their situation might not be good in terms of the world, whereby when it comes to the worldly affairs of issues of provision, safety, security, and just general worldly affairs, they will not be in a good condition compared to this group, right? Because they are not, they don't operate in that way. But in the hereafter, they obviously are in a better situation, right? So regarding this group, or these two groups, the Shaykh says, فَالْفَرْقُ بَيْنَ هَؤُلَاءِ وَبَيْنَ الْقِسْمِ الَّذِينَ قَبْلَهُمْ. The difference between these people, category 3, and the second category is that those who are before them, they have, those who are before them, right, the ones who came before, they have an element of weakness in their religion. So even though they are worshippers, so pay attention to this, even though they are worshippers, right, so they are worshipping, they are given to ibadah, they do all their prayers, they do dhikr, they do nawafil, everything they do, so they are strong in ibadah, but the religion isn't just ibadah, right? So even though they are strong worshippers, because of their neglect and weakness in relation to the affairs of al-qadr, they actually have a weakness in their deen. There's an actual weakness in their deen, despite being good worshippers, right? And so this is because their weak reliance upon Allah, their weak, the absence of seeking aid from Allah, and but nevertheless, as long as they continue in their worship, and so on and so forth, then they will be better in the hereafter, right? So long as they remain upon that. But as for these people, the third category, these people have with them like strength and resilience, and this is as it relates to the affairs of al-qadr, what comes and happens in the worldly affairs. However, in the hereafter, there will be nothing for them except what they have in agreement of the Sharia, of the Sunnah. So whatever they do, that's the only thing that will remain in the hereafter for them. So they have a strength in the world, but a weakness in the religion, right? They have weakness in ibadah, but they have strength in the other affairs, right, in terms of the worldly affairs. Finally, the fourth group, the last group, al-qism al-rabi', he says, من فاتهم تحقيق أصلي الشرع وأصلي القدر فليس عندهم عبادة لله تعالى ولا استعانة به ولا لجوء إليه عند الشدة فهم مستكبرون عن عبادة الله مستغنون بأنفسهم عن خالقهم. So he says that these people are the ones who have lost both of the two principles of the Sharia and the two principles of Al-Qadr. These people don't really have worship of Allah, they don't worship Allah, nor do they seek aid in Him, and nor seek refuge and protection with Him when it comes to hardships and calamities. So really these are people who are arrogant from worshipping Allah. So they don't worship Allah, and nor do they feel that they are in need of relying upon Allah and seeking aid from Allah in their worldly pursuits and their worldly affairs. And so, and in fact, some of these people, the Shaykh says that you will find even some of these people that when it comes to hardships and difficulties or attaining their needs, you might find some of them وَرُبَّمَا لجأوا في الشدائد وإدراك مطالبهم إلى الشياطين فأطاعوها فيما تريد وأعانتهم فيما يريدون. Right? So some of these people might even, in extreme difficulties or in seeking their needs, might go and seek refuge with the jinn. They go and seek aid and refuge with the shayateen, with the devils, and the devils will aid them and assist them and give them what they want. And so then a person فَيَظُنُّ الظَّانِ أَنَّ هَذَا مِنْ بَابِ الْكَرَامَاتِ. So then a person thinks, oh, this is from the miracles. This person, is receiving miracles. وَهُوَ مِنْ بَابِ الْإِحَانَاتِ. Whereas in reality, this is nothing but a type of humiliation for that person. Why? Because this person is not a worshipper of Allah. He's not someone who relies upon Allah and shows the type of resilient patience. But he goes and instead he humiliates himself and he has to obey and worship the jinn and seek refuge in the jinn. So the jinn then basically play with him and humiliate him. So this is like a type of humiliation. And لِأَنَّ عَاقِبَتَهُمْ الذُّلْ وَالْهَوَانِ, because the end result of these types of people is going to be humiliation and belittlement. And وَهَذَا الْقِسْمِ الشَّرُّ الْأَقْسَامِ, this category here is the most evil of all of the types. So these people do not have with them the shara' because they do not abide by the commandments and keep away from the prohibitions, nor do they have with them al-qadr, belief in al-qadr and the patience and the resilience. And so instead, what do they do? What do they turn to when it comes to seeking their needs and seeking protection? So this obviously is like the people of disbelief, the people of kufr and shirk and the people of disbelief. And that's not to say that this can't happen amongst Muslims as well, right? And Muslims can also enter into disbelief. But this state and this condition, you find it amongst the people of disbelief. They are not worshippers of Allah. And likewise in the worldly affairs, because they are not worshippers of Allah and believers in Allah, and because they don't believe in Al-Qadr, how do they pursue their needs and their protection? Well, they worship the jinn. So this is, you find many of the allies of Iblis from the people of disbelief, from the elites of the people of disbelief. They turn to the devils, they worship the devils, they do what the devils request of them, of evil, vile deeds, and the shayateen in turn give them what they want in terms of the worldly affairs. And likewise amongst the Muslims, you find there are those who either could be munafiqeen, hypocrites, disbelievers, or from the extremist or the extremist misguided Sufis and people like that. And because of certain beliefs they have, in terms of innovated beliefs, they might have some share of this as well. And people think that these people are somehow righteous because apparent miracles happen through them, or whatever. So this is the most evil of the four categories. They are neither worshippers of Allah, they do not enact the Sharia, nor do they abide what the belief in Al-Qadr, what that requires from them in terms of having sabr in the affairs, and taking the right ways and means, having tawakkul in attaining the worldly benefits and repelling the worldly harms. So these are the worst type of people, as the Shaykh said, and this brings us to the end of this section. So just to recap then, when it comes to interacting with people and seeing people and how they are in relation to the Sharia and Al-Qadr, we will find these four categories of people, right? Those who combine the two principles of the Sharia and Al-Qadr, and so they are the believers, the righteous, the successful ones, those who are favored by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so they are favored and they will benefit in the hereafter, and they are favored and benefit in the world. Their affair is good in the world and their affair is good in the hereafter, and they are strong, patient, resilient, and so on and so forth. Then you have those who are given to worship, and they are strong in, or they basically are, in terms of ibadah, but they have a weakness and they do not implement the affairs in terms of the world. And so this is like a type of deficiency in deen, right? So even though there is ibadah and good ibadah, good obedience, nevertheless it is still a deficiency in deen. And so this manifests when it comes to calamities and hardships and not being able to have patience in the worldly affairs and worldly difficulties. So they don't really, implement the issue of Al-Qadr. The third group is the other way around. They are not really worshippers, but when it comes to worldly affairs, they do have a reliance upon Allah, and they do have this determination, dedication, patience, and things like that, and they will achieve some of what they desire. But their situation might be better in the life of this world, but it is worse in the hereafter. And then you have the last group, as we mentioned, who do not implement either any of these four principles, the two relating to the legislation and the two relating to Al-Qadr, and so they end up being worshippers and obedient to the devils in pursuing their needs and in repelling harms. And this is humiliation, debasement, and so they will have receive their punishment in the hereafter. So this brings us to the end of this section, and we really are at the end of the book now, so we only have maybe one or two lessons left, inshaAllah ta'ala. Shall we finish this before Ramadan? But at the end section, so now that we understand the different types of people and how they implement these principles to do with the Sharia and Al-Qadr, then we come to the end. In the last section, we're going to look at various groups of innovation, various sects among the Muslims, and the different types of mistakes they have made, and where they stand in relation to the Sharia and in relation to Al-Qadr, and also in relation to the sifat, to the attributes, which is the first half of the book, right? So the first half of the book is the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Second part of the book is Al-Qadr and Ash-Shara, legislation and the decree. So different groups appeared amongst the Muslims, and they obviously deviated and erred. So in the next lesson we'll look at different groups and where they stand and how they deviated in these three issues: the attributes of Allah, the Sharia of Allah, the obligation of acting upon, and the divine decree, right? The Mu'tazila, who denied the decree, the Jabariyyah, who exaggerated. So we'll look at all of these, inshallah. That will really seal and end the last section. So that may take us 1 or 2 lessons, inshallah, maybe 1 or 2 lessons. So we'll leave that. I will conclude here today's lesson. Inshallah, we'll continue next week. والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.